the right word." "Forgive me for using it," he muttered. "You do not realize at first that you are lying, when you only act lies and don't speak them. And I did think that perhaps, that possibly, of course, I was ridiculously wrong. It was atrocious, unforgivable. I don't ask you to forgive me. I don't want you to. But those dear days when our little boy oh, you know, when you kissed me that night beside his grave." "What?" A lightning change came over the young man, as if the word had been an electric current suddenly shot into him. "Kissed you?" "It was nothing. You did not know you did it." "But here hold on. This is serious. Did I kiss you? You are sure you are not dreaming?" "I would not be very likely to dream that," she said, with a strange smile. "But of course it was only at such a time as you would have kissed your sister anybody. Your very forgetting it shows that." But a dim memory was awakening in him, frightfully perturbing to his mind. "I kissed you," he repeated, and slowly realized that he had been that consummate ass. The poor baby's dead hand had retained its old power to entrap a simpleton unawares. Well, simpleton or not, Guthrie Carey was Guthrie Carey, sailor bred, accustomed to meet vital emergencies with boldness and promptness, accustomed also to take his own views of what was a man's part at such times. While she implored him to say no more about that kiss, crying shame upon herself for mentioning it, he sat in silence, thinking hard. As soon as she had done, he spoke. "Miss Pennycuick, I now understand everything. You are completely justified. It is I who have been to blame." And he then, in precise language, such as no real lover could have used, but still as prettily as was possible under the circumstances, requested the honour of her hand in marriage. To his astonishment, she laughed. It was a wild sounding cackle, and quickly turned into a wail. "Ha ha ha!" She faced him again, head up and hands down. "That, Mr Carey, is the one way out of it that is utterly, absolutely, internally impossible." "Why?" he demanded, with his man's dull incomprehension, and went on to demonstrate that there was no other. "I do not wish," he lied chivalrously, "to take any other. I believe me, I am not ungrateful for your thinking a great deal more of me than I deserve. I will try to show myself worthy." A magnanimous arm attempted to encircle her. She backed from it, and rose hurriedly from her chair, with what he would have imagined a gesture of repulsion if he had not known her, from her own showing, so over eager for his embraces. He rose too. "Do not!" she cried breathlessly, passionately, "as if I could dream. What can you think of me, to imagine that I would for a moment?" She broke from him and ran towards the door, sobbing, with her handkerchief to her eyes. In 3 strides he was there before her, cutting off her retreat, so she swung back into the room, cast herself on the floor beside a sofa, and throwing up her arms, plunged her head down between them into the depths of a large cushion, which smothered cries that would otherwise have been shrieks. She abandoned all effort to control herself, except the effort to hide, which was futile. Guthrie Carey's first feeling was of alarm, lest anyone should hear and come in to see what was the matter. He felt like wanting to guard the door. But in a minute or two his soft heart was so worked upon by the spectacle before him that he could think of nothing else. However little he might want to marry Mary Pennycuick, he was not going to be answerable for this sort of thing. So he marched resolutely to the sofa, and stooped to lift the convulsed creature bodily into his arms. He might as well have tried to grasp a sleeping porcupine. "How dare you!" she cried shrilly, whirling to her feet, dilating like a hooded snake before his astonished eyes. "How dare you touch me?" He was too cowed to answer, and she stood a moment, all fire and fury, glaring at him, her tear-ravaged face distorted, her hands clenched. Then she whirled out of the room, and this time he made no effort to stop her. He dropped back on the sofa, and said to himself helplessly: "Well, I'm blowed." There was stillness for some time. This part of the house seemed quite empty, save for one buzzing fly, which he or Mary had let in. The little housekeeper was very particular about flies in summer, every window and chimney opening being wire netted, every door labelled with a printed request to the user to shut it, and his dazed mind occupied itself with the idea of how this insect would have distressed her if she had not had so much else to think of. He had an impulse to hunt it, for her sake, through the green shadowed space in which it careered in long tacks with such energy and noise, but, standing up, he was seized with a stronger impulse to leave the house forthwith, and everything in it. He wanted liberty to consider his position and further proceedings before he faced the family. As he approached the door, it was opened from without. Deb stood on the threshold, pale, proud, with tight lips and sombre eyes. She bowed to him as only she could bow to a person she was offended with. "Would you kindly see my father in his office, Mr Carey?" she inquired, with stony formality. "He wishes to speak to you." "Certainly, Miss Deborah," he replied, not daring to preface the words with even a "how do you do?" "I want to see him. I want to see him particularly." Deb swept round to lead the way downstairs. An embarrassing march it was, tandem fashion, through the long passages of the rambling house. While trying to arrange his thoughts for the coming interview, Captain Carey studied her imperious back and shoulders, the haughty poise of her head, and though he was not the one that had behaved badly, he had never felt so small. At the door of the morning room she dismissed him with a jerk of the hand. "You know your way," said she, and vanished. "She is more beautiful than ever," was his poignant thought, as he walked away from her, and from all the glorious life that she suggested to such a dull and common doom. Mr Pennycuick, at first, was a terrible figure, struggling between his father fury and his old gentleman instincts of courtesy to a guest. "Sir," said he, "I am sorry that I have to speak to you under my own roof. In another place I could better have expressed what I have to say." But before he could get to the gist of the matter, Mary intervened. "Miss Keene has some refreshment for Mr Carey in the dining room," she said. "And, father, I want, if you please, to have a word with you first." She had recovered self-possession, and wore a rigid, determined air, contrasting with the sailor's bewilderment, which was so great that he found himself driven from the office before he had made up his mind whether he ought to go or stay. He sat down to his unnecessary meal, and tried to eat, while an embarrassed maiden lady talked platitudes to him. Didn't he find it very dusty in town? Miss Keene, knitting feverishly, was anxious to be informed, and didn't he think the country looked well for the time of year? He was relieved from this tedium by another summons to the office. Fortified with a glass of good wine, he returned to the encounter. inwardly calling upon his gods to direct